This short narrated report provides a summary of our research to co-produce a blueprint for community-based participative transport planning with the aim of reducing transport-related social exclusion across Greater Manchester. The report is produced by researchers at the Manchester Urban Institute within the University of Manchester. The project has been supported by Transport for the North, Transport for Greater Manchester, Oldham and Wigan District Councils, and various locally based community organisations. The work has involved researching with residents in Hindley, Shulver, Wornath and Newbold, and we thank them for their participation. To set the context, the right to access essential services is basically being denied to a variety of low-income people due to inadequate public transport provision, especially in deprived parts of Greater Manchester. This means that many residents are unable to access essential services, employment, education, healthcare, and other welfare activities. This compromises their lifestyle choices and heavily impacts on their quality of life. For example, young people might depend on public transport to get them to work or training, but are unable to use the buses to access places of employment. Analysis by Transport for the North has identified some key groups and areas who are most likely to be impacted, and we'll show this later in the presentation. They are young people, Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, the elderly, people on low incomes, and parents of young children. Often, it is the most marginalised members of society who are further marginalised by lack of public transport. Thereby, they are further marginalised and excluded from public participation. Against this background, in 2023, Andy Burnham took over all the private bus companies in Greater Manchester and brought them back under public control, and hence began the development of the new Manchester B network. This presented a perfect opportunity to make a real difference to public transport provision across Greater Manchester, and so improve people's social inclusion and quality of life. Against this background, the aim of this project was to work with local communities to co-produce a blueprint to help inform development of the B network, particularly for people in underserved areas and forgotten locations. This would involve a process of close collaboration and communication with residents in these areas as part of the planning process to improve the implementation of the B network in ways that enhance people's social outcomes. As researchers, we recognise the importance of designing new ways to engage local communities as key stakeholders in this planning process, and to work in more participative, imaginative and creative ways than those are generally used for public consultation exercises. We recognised that it was also vital to reach out to the more marginalised and harder to reach groups who tended not to volunteer to engage in the usual style of community engagement. We therefore undertook a series of 7 focus groups to test different methods of participative recruitment and to trial a selection of creative participatory methods to encourage deep discussions about people's travel needs. These participatory exercises were underpinned by desk-based GIS mapping to profile the local areas that we visited. The methodology that we are using to develop the pilot projects is based on participatory action research, whereby we aim to build the local capacity for integrated policy action through engagement of a wide range of public and private stakeholders in the planning process. In this way, we aim to co-produce an evidence base by measuring and auditing local conditions both quantitatively and qualitatively, and then to undertake action research with key stakeholders and local communities to identify priority needs. In this way, we co-produce a set of local action plans and implementation agendas and establish local partnerships and working arrangements to deliver these plans. Finally, we evaluate the outcomes holistically against social outcomes. The researchers employed a mixed methods approach, firstly using GIS mapping software to plot specific local contextual information, drawing on existing available national and local data sources. This has allowed us to get a broad overview of the area. Secondly, we have made several visits to the sites to be able to take photographs and record local conditions. This has also helped us to identify community-based organisations, many of whom have helped us with the recruitment of the participants in the research. These have involved focus groups with residents, particularly within hard-to-reach communities in Wigan, Oldham and Rochdale. In the focus groups, we used a series of creative methods to encourage discussion and a lively participation, and also in some of the groups, participative mapping exercises for them to plot their travel routes and methods of travel and where they're going.
The desk-based GIS mapping exercise involved plotting local demographic data from the 2021 census with variables including age, gender, ethnicity, income level, disabilities, economic status, employment status, car availability, housing tenure, population density, and highest level of education. Travel information was then added to include bus networks with routes, bus stops, and travel frequency. Key points of interest were also added to include education facilities, health facilities, green spaces, key services, and social community facilities. The information was analyzed according to public transport access points to assess the accessibility levels between homes and or key destinations. Comparisons were then made across neighborhoods with different levels of transport-related social exclusion risk according to different modes of transport, which are walking, cycling, bus, and driving. The map on the left of this slide shows the population density of Wigan, and the maps on the right compare the distribution of young and older population in Wigan. We can see in the left map that clustering happens in main towns across the authority, which almost resembles a distribution of young population in the top right map. However, the older population are more concentrated on the outskirts of Wigan in more rural locations, like the north parts of the borough. On this slide, we can see the distribution of the retired population in Wigan, which is quite similar to the older population, concentrate in the outskirts, especially the north part of Wigan. The right map shows the level of car ownership in different LLOCAs and the locations of bus stops. High car ownership can be observed on the outskirts of the borough where there are fewer bus stops. This is because bus stops are predominantly clustered around the main towns where population density is higher. The unequal distribution of the bus network not only increases car dependency, but may increase vulnerability and the transport-related social exclusion among the older population in Wigan. This slide compares the locations of key health services and the distribution of different groups of people. The map on the left indicates that high percentage, which is around 36 to 44% of old population, live in areas with no key health services. Top right map shows the distribution of people with long-term health conditions across Wigan, and we can see that some areas with 9 to 10% of people with long-term health conditions have no key health services, as these tend to cluster around more populated areas. Bottom right map shows a different pattern of distribution for people with disabilities. People with disabilities seem to live near to health facilities, possibly due to inadequate transport provision. This slide shows the locations of recreational and social infrastructure in relation to the distribution of older population in Wigan. In the top map, restaurants and cafes are mostly located in highly dense areas with lower older population similar to the locations of places of worship in the bottom right map. Meanwhile, there are only small areas of green spaces close to the areas with high percentage of older population, particularly in the north of Wigan. The older population must travel long distances to access these facilities, which increases their risk of being socially excluded. This emphasizes the need for a better transport network to reduce the effect of transport-related social exclusion among older, vulnerable population. Contrary to the distance of green spaces to the older population, the younger population can access more green spaces with bigger sizes closer to where they live. This is mapped in the left map. Although they have the advantage of easy access to green spaces, the same conclusion cannot be drawn regarding schools. While Wigan has a smaller proportion of young people compared to the older population, secondary schools and colleges are located at a distance, with some LSOAs lacking schools. This requires them significant travel in order to receive proper education. These graphs plot the travel time to health facilities in Hindley according to different modes of travel, which are walking, bus, cycling, and driving. The different colors represent 5, 10, 15, and 20 minutes traveling time. It's interesting to see that apart from a few distinct routes into Hindley, the access time to health facilities in the town centre by bus is not much different to walking. Access times by bike and car are similar. However, cyclists have off-road alternatives, making journey times more evenly distributed around the town centre compared to cars which are restricted to roads. These maps plot the travel time to educational facilities in Hindley according to different modes of travel: walking, bus, cycling, and driving. As in the previous slide, the different colors represent 5, 10, 15, and 20 minutes traveling time. Again, it is interesting to see that, apart from a few distinct routes into Hindley, the access time to educational facilities in the town centre by bus is not much different to walking. Access times by bike and car are similar around the town centre. However, it is clear that cars are able to cover greater distances once away from the town centre.
The following slides describe the quality development of this study and cover the work involved in preparing for and hosting 3 focus groups with Hindley residents. This work included conducting site visits, identifying local venues, recruitment strategies such as connecting with local community organisations, and sample selection to ensure that we engaged with the groups who are most likely affected by transport-related social exclusion, namely the elderly, young parents, and those on low income. Building on the demographic information provided from the GIS mapping exercise, 3 site visits to Hindley were conducted in January and February of 2024. The aim was for the research team to familiarise themselves with the local area, which involved walking and driving around Hindley, as well as using public transport links. Members of the team travelled in from Manchester and via Wigan using both buses and trains, whilst others travelled there by car. During the visits, the team observed the features of Hindley, such as the services, facilities and transport provision, and also identified local venues and community organisations. The hope was that key contacts in the community and representatives of local charitable organisations might be well placed and willing to help with the recruitment for the focus groups. Photographs and videos were taken as a means of recording the visits. From the site visits, it was observed that Hindley is actually well catered for in terms of local amenities, which include having a train station, Tesco Extra supermarket, several schools, including a high school, several churches, a library, community centre, post office, nurseries, shops, cafes, a dance studio, and several community centres. Recruitment for the focus groups was targeted at the most disadvantaged areas of Hindley, where residents were more likely to experience the effects of transport-related social exclusion. Community contacts in these areas were nominated to help with recruitment and were offered a financial incentive to do so. This was in the form of shopping vouchers. Recruitment posters were distributed around Hindley in cafes, churches, community centres, at Tesco Extra, via a Wigan Council worker and via the care centre. The focus groups were also advertised on local Facebook groups, including Hindley Green Residents Association, Friends of Hindley Cemetery, Hindley and Hindley Green Community Chat, Borsdane Wood and Rayner Park Friends Group, and Wigan Notice Board. The local schools were also contacted, but unfortunately none responded. Local community venues, Hindley Sports and Social Club and Hindley Library and Community Centre were used to host the focus groups. As previously mentioned, both venues are located in the most disadvantaged part of Hindley and both offer a range of events and activities targeted at different age groups. 3 focus groups were planned to consult with groups identified as most likely to be affected by transport-related social exclusion. There was an afternoon session for senior citizens, an evening session for workers on low income or unemployed people, and an afternoon session for the parents of young children. The sessions were scheduled at times that were anticipated to suit the different groups. Recruiting people to take part in focus group sessions is always quite challenging, hence we asked local contacts to help us with the recruitment. However, despite the community contact at the Library and Community Centre having advertised the session across their networks, only 2 people signed up to attend. One person had signed up for the session who no longer lived in Hindley. He had moved to live in Wigan following an accident and found that he was unable to attend his medical appointments from Hindley due to a lack of public transport options. In the end, he was unable to attend the focus group because his bus was cancelled. We managed to tap into a public transport protest group based in Hindley via Facebook. This group consisted predominantly of elderly and retired members who interpreted the poster as an invitation to attend rather than requesting to sign up for a place. No one was turned away on the day and all attendees were able to participate in the session. Fortunately, we had 4 researchers present, so the group was divided into 2 separate focus groups. As with the first group, recruitment for the final session was also difficult. 4 people had signed up to attend, but only 1 arrived to participate. However, on the day, 2 additional people turned up, having seen the poster on a Facebook group. Recruiting people to take part in focus group sessions is always challenging, hence we asked local contacts to help us with the recruitment. However, despite the community contact at the Library and Community Centre having advertised the session across her networks, only 2 people signed up to attend. One person had signed up for the session who no longer lived in Hindley. He had moved to live in Wigan following an accident and found subsequently that he was unable to attend his medical appointments from Hindley due to a lack of public transport options. Ironically, he was unable to attend the focus group because his bus was cancelled. Our community contact nominated 3 of his staff to take part on the day. They were all young parents and working for the charity on a low income. We managed to tap into a public transport protest group based in Hindley via Facebook. This group consisted predominantly of elderly and retired members who interpreted the poster as an invitation to attend, rather than requesting to sign up for a place formally. In the end, no one was turned away and all attendees were able to participate in the session. Fortunately, there were 4 researchers present, so we simply divided the group into 2 separate focus groups. As with the first group, recruitment for the final session was also difficult. 4 people had signed up to attend, but only 1 arrived to participate. However, 2 additional people turned up on the day, having seen the poster on a Facebook group. They were both asylum seekers, and this added an extra dimension to the discussion. We employed different methods of participatory engagement in this study to find out how best to facilitate discussions in the focus groups. The methods included using participatory mapping exercises and photo voice. For the mapping exercise, participants were asked to draw their regular journeys around Hindley according to the mode of transport they used. So we had green for walking, brown for driving, orange for public transport. During this exercise, we discussed where people travelled to, how they travelled there, any travel issues they encountered, and suggested changes that would improve access to places. The photo voice exercise involved using photographs of places in Hindley, for example, the high street, shops, schools, the library, etc. The participants were asked to describe their typical journeys in Hindley using the images. They were also able to draw and write alongside the images. Ideally, participants would have been asked to bring along their own photographs, but due to the recruitment challenges, the research team provided the photos. This digitised map represents the maps from all the focus group sessions combined. The mapping exercise helped to facilitate discussion about travel in the local area, with participants bouncing ideas off one another whilst they engaged with the task. Here are some of the examples of issues discussed. Firstly, there was difficulty getting to the railway station and GP surgery, as there is currently no bus service to this part of Hindley. The route via Ladies Lane is a challenging uphill climb for some people. There are also steps at the railway station, which precludes certain people from accessing it. There are no banks in Hindley, so people have to travel to nearby Wigan, Leigh or Bolton to do their banking. Asylum seekers living in Hindley have a long journey every fortnight to Liverpool for a compulsory Home Office appointment. This involves taking 3 buses and takes over 4 hours each way. They can't miss the appointment, so allow extra time in case they miss a bus or one of the buses is delayed or cancelled. There is reportedly one bus that frequently misses out a section of road and the bus stop by Tesco Extra, which causes much frustration. Access to one of the green spaces in a nearby housing estate was said to have been compromised when the bus service was discontinued. There is a bus that passes the park, but the bus stop is almost as far away as simply walking to the park. The themes from the focus group discussions are grouped under the following headings. Travel behaviours. This offers some insight into how the participants typically travel around their local area. Bus provision and access. This reflects the residents' perceptions of the existing public transport provision. The next section presents some of the key issues that people are currently experiencing with the bus provision and highlights some of the implications for those most at risk of travel-related social exclusion. These themes will be discussed in more detail in the following slides. This slide highlights the participants' main travel behaviours. Firstly, residents regularly used Hindley Town Centre and generally walk to access the facilities and services that are available. The exception being where facilities are not available. For example, many of the older residents mentioned the lack of banks in Hindley and described how they now have to travel out to nearby places, such as Wigan or Leigh, to do their banking. Participants also mentioned other journeys that they make to surrounding towns, often using the bus service, to access activities for children, to visit friends and family, and to go shopping. For example, there's a direct bus to the Trafford Centre in Manchester. Some of the participants travel outside Hindley for work, for example in central Manchester, whilst others live in outlying villages and travel into Hindley for work. Many of the elderly residents are dependent on the bus service to access services and for social reasons. A range of issues were raised concerning bus provision and access for residents in Hindley. For example, it was noted that there are good bus links between Hindley and nearby Wigan, Leigh, Bolton and the Trafford Centre. However, the route to Bolton was said to be a source of great frustration as there were often severe delays due to heavy traffic congestion. There are limited bus routes linking to the outlying villages, making travel more difficult for some, especially those who are dependent on the bus to get to and from work. One major issue for many residents was that there is no bus route to Hindley railway station, which is located up a hill to the north of Hindley town centre. There are also steps up to the station, making access difficult for anyone with mobility issues. The health centre is also located near to the station, presenting the same access issues. In the absence of a car, the long walk uphill is too challenging for some residents. Participants were keen to point out issues relating to transport reliability. They complained that buses are generally not reliable and that services are often delayed or cancelled. Some also had difficulty accessing accurate travel information, although this was possibly due to systems being transferred over to the new B network timetables. The main implications of an unreliable service were highlighted. People described having to stand at bus stops for long periods of time in the cold, with negative impacts on their health. Others described being late for appointments for work, with potential negative impacts being loss of earnings or employment, and serious consequences for asylum seekers who must attend a fortnightly appointment. Some people felt that they couldn't trust the buses, and this in turn resulted in a lack of motivation to go out, especially when the weather is bad. This resulted in missed social opportunities and could equate to loneliness for senior citizens. One couple had been stranded in Manchester late with their young child on a journey back from London. There was no bus home to Hindley and they had to call on a friend to come and collect them. Participants were keen to point out issues relating to transport reliability. They complain that buses are generally not reliable and that services are often delayed or cancelled. Some also had difficulty accessing accurate travel information, although this is possibly due to systems being in the process of transfer all over to the new B network timetables. The main implications of an unreliable service were highlighted. People described having to stand at bus stops for long periods of time in the cold with negative impacts on their health. Others described being late for appointments or for work with potential negative impacts being loss of earnings or employment and serious consequences for asylum seekers who must attend a fortnightly appointment. Some people felt that they couldn't trust the buses, which resulted in a lack of motivation to go out, especially when the weather is bad. This could result in missed social opportunities, which, for example, might equate to loneliness for senior citizens. One person said, "You don't go out where you think you really want to go because you don't know when you're going to get back. You don't want to go too far because you don't know how you're going to get back." Another important issue raised by participants was about transport frequency. There were several examples where infrequent services, i.e. where there's only one bus per hour, caused issues for people. For example, if they just missed a bus or where the bus doesn't arrive at all. Several implications were described. As previously mentioned, people having to stand for long periods of time in the cold can have impacts on their health. One elderly widow described how she waited for over an hour at a bus stop on her own, suffering increasing pain due to her arthritis being affected by the cold. Since her husband died, she now depends on the bus service to get out and see people. Previously, he would have driven them to places. Some people described having to pay expensive taxi fares when they missed the hourly bus to ensure that they were on time for work. This obviously impacts on their finances, but they could face a potential loss of earnings or even job loss if they are late for work. Young parents were anxious to get home from work quickly to be with their children. A more frequent service would certainly help with this. Finally, there was a level of car dependency amongst participants because of the lack of frequent bus services. For example, people needing to travel home from Manchester later in the evening or at night, they couldn't get a bus, so therefore needed to drive. Lack of accurate timetable information was a source of frustration for participants. There was some confusion due to the changeover of systems from private to public ownership at the time of this study, but senior citizens, not being very tech-savvy, tend to rely on paper timetables being displayed at bus stops. Lack of timetable information resulted in a lack of confidence to use the buses, particularly on new routes, and again, not going out can result in loneliness for some people, especially senior citizens. Following the initial round of community engagement sessions, issues around recruitment and diversity of the sample were identified. The participatory mapping exercise was considered a useful tool for understanding the local area and its current transport provision, and it was a good way to facilitate initial discussion about some of the main issues affecting residents. However, the main problem with the usual focus group methodology was that it was difficult to attract participants from the more marginalised populations, i.e. those most likely to be affected by transport-related social exclusion. A second wave of sessions was therefore scheduled using more creative methods of engagement, with a view to targeting a broader representation of demographics in the sample, including participants with low socioeconomic status and representatives from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, i.e. people who wouldn't normally choose to attend a research focus group. The proposed methods were a chop and chat cookery session facilitated by Cracking Good Food, an organisation that promotes healthy, affordable cooking. A slow sew session facilitated by Inspire Women's Group and Peaceful Minds Charity in Oldham. And Vox Pop, where community residents joined with the research team to talk to people on the street and at bus stops. Chop and chat sessions were scheduled in local community centres, firstly in Sholver Community Centre near Oldham, and secondly in the Moss Street Youth Centre in Newbold, Rochdale. Contacts in the local community, in this case the managers of the two community centres, were called upon to help with recruitment. The session in Sholver was scheduled to coincide with the end of a regular card making session, so that members could easily stay on for the cooking session, which would also provide their lunch. The second session in Newbold was targeted at residents using the weekly social supermarket.